It began with the end. For the seed, there was no warning that life as it knew it was over. It had spent its existence high above the ground, cradled in the warm, swaying embrace of the mother flower. It had known only the golden kiss of the sun and the gentle rocking of the summer breeze. It lived in a world of light, of height, and of visibility. It believed that this suspension in the air, this closeness to the sky, was what it meant to be alive. And then the wind changed. It wasn't the gentle zephyr of August anymore. It was a cold, sharp breath from the north, carrying the scent of frost and finality. The stem that held the seed began to wither, turning from a vibrant green to a brittle brown. The connection was severed. In one terrifying instant, gravity claimed its prize. The fall felt eternal. The seed tumbled through the air, watching the only home it had ever known drift further and further away. Panic surged through its tiny consciousness. Why is this happening? What did I do wrong? It thought. I am being discarded. I am being cast down. It hit the earth with a dull thud. The ground was not like the sky. It was hard, cold, and indifferent. The seed lay there, stunned, amidst the decaying leaves of autumn, the graveyard of the summer's glory. It waited to be rescued. It waited for the gardener's hand or the wind to lift it back up to the heights. But no rescue came. Instead, the rains came. Heavy, relentless, freezing rain pounded against the seed, driving it deeper into the mud. Then came the leaves, piling on top like a heavy blanket, blotting out the last rays of the sun. And finally, the snow. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The seed was no longer just fallen, it was buried. Panic turned to despair. In the crushing dark, the seed began to construct a narrative of failure. It believed that this darkness was a prison cell. It believed that being covered by the dirt was an act of burial. I have been buried because I am worthless, the seed whispered to the damp soil. My life is over. I am rotting in a grave of ice. The winter deepened. The ground froze solid, locking the seed in a vice-like grip. It felt claustrophobic, paralyzed. The shell of the seed, the hard outer armor that had protected it for so long, felt rigid and tight. The seed clung to this identity. I am this shell, it told itself. I must stay intact. I must protect who I am. It did not know that the very thing it was trying to protect was the only thing standing in the way of its destiny. It lay there, a tiny speck of potential, convinced it was a speck of debris. It felt the weight of the world pressing down on it, not realizing that this pressure was not trying to crush it, but to hug it. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The seed lost track of time. It existed in a state of suspended animation, a purgatory of cold. It felt abandoned by the sun, forgotten by the flower, and ignored by God. It was the dark night of the soul, played out in the microcosm of the soil. But the earth wasn't ignoring the seed. The earth is a patient mother, and she knows the difference between a burial and a planting, even when the seed does not. She held the seed in her cold, dark womb, whispering in a frequency too low for the seed to hear yet. Wait, just wait. The work is being done in the dark. The turning point did not come with warmth. It came with pain. As the winter reached its peak, the moisture in the soil began to penetrate the seed's outer shell. For months, the seed had resisted this intrusion. It wanted to remain dry, hard, and separate. But the winter was relentless. The moisture softened the armor. The frost expanded and contracted, creating hairline fractures in the casing the seed had spent its whole life perfecting. The seed felt like it was dying. "I am coming apart," it cried out in the silence. "Everything that holds me together is failing." This is the great paradox of transformation. Before you can become who you are meant to be, you must stop being who you were. The shell, the ego, the identity, the safety mechanism had to break. The pain was sharp and terrifying. A crack formed down the center of the seed's back. Cold water rushed in. The seed felt naked, exposed, and vulnerable to the harsh elements. It felt like a violation. "Why must I be broken?" it wept. "Was the darkness not enough? Was the cold not enough? Must I be destroyed too?" But in that moment of total brokenness, something shifted. With the shell cracked, the seed was no longer separated from the earth. For the first time, it tasted the soil. It tasted the minerals, the decay of ancient leaves, the history of the forest floor. It realized that the dirt was not dead. It was alive with nutrients, with potential, with the energy of 1,000 lives that had come before. The seed stopped fighting. It had no strength left to fight. It surrendered to the breaking. It allowed the shell to fall away. And in that surrender, the silence changed. It was no longer a terrifying, empty silence. It became a pregnant, vibrating silence. The seed began to listen, not with its shell, but with its center, its heart. It heard the hum of the earth. It felt the vibrations of roots from the great oak trees nearby, ancient networks of life communicating in the deep. It realized it was part of a vast, interconnected choir. "I am not alone," the seed realized. "I am connected." Then the strangest sensation occurred. It wasn't a movement upward, but a movement downward. Before it could rise, it had to anchor. A tiny pale root emerged from the broken heart of the seed. It didn't seek the light, it sought the dark. It pushed deeper into the cold, unknown abyss of the soil. This was the terrifying work of trust, to grow into the dark, to anchor yourself in the invisible. The seed learned that stability does not come from seeing the sun. It comes from holding on to the ground. It learned to drink from the darkness. It drew strength from the very things it had feared: the mud, the decay, the heavy pressure. It transmuted the pain of the winter into the energy of the root. It was no longer a seed, it was a seedling, but it was still underground, it was still blind. This is the phase of the journey that requires the most faith. The shell is gone, but the bloom has not arrived. You are raw, tender, and unformed. You are doing the heavy lifting in the dark, with no applause, no sunlight, and no guarantee of success. The seed spent weeks in this state, anchoring, drinking, expanding. The pressure of the soil, which once felt like a tombstone, now felt like a blanket swaddling a newborn. The seed understood now that the winter was necessary. Without the cold, the shell never would have cracked. Without the crack, the root never would have emerged. Without the burial,
there would be no life. The seed forgave the wind for blowing it down. It forgave the frost for freezing it. It understood that every harsh element was a collaborator in its destiny. It found peace in the pitch black. It learned to love the dark, for the dark was the womb of its becoming.
Then the whisper came. It wasn't a sound, it was a temperature, a subtle shift in the vibration of the soil. The iron grip of the frost began to loosen. The water in the soil changed from icy needles to a fluid caress. Spring. Far above, millions of miles away, the sun had shifted its angle. The seed could not see the sun, but it felt the call. It was an undeniable magnetic pull, a voice singing to the very core of its being. Come up, it is time. A new energy ignited within the center of the seedling. It was different from the energy of the root. This was a fiery, vertical energy. It was the will to live. It was the audacity of hope. The seedling began to push. This was a different kind of struggle. The struggle of the fall was panic. The struggle of the breaking was pain. But the struggle of the ascent was power. It had to push against gravity. It had to push against the weight of the dirt that had covered it for months. But the seedling was different now. It was no longer the fragile thing that had fallen from the flower. It had spent the winter training. It had been forged in the dark. Its roots were deep and wide, anchoring it so firmly that it could afford to be brave. It pushed upward, millimeter by millimeter. It navigated around stones and pushed through clumps of clay. It was blind, yet it knew exactly where to go. It followed the warmth. The journey upward was exhausting. There were moments when the seedling wanted to stop, to rest in the comfortable dark. Why risk it? A part of it whispered. You are safe here. The surface is dangerous. But the call was louder than the fear. The memory of the light, not the memory of the past, but the memory of the future, pulled it onward. And then the moment arrived. The tip of the sprout broke the surface tension of the soil. The sensation was overwhelming. After months of heavy, damp darkness, the seedling was struck by the lightness of air. It felt the breeze, not the harsh winter wind, but a soft, fragrant spring zephyr. And then, the light. It wasn't just seeing the light, it was drinking it. The sun hit the pale green shoot, and a chemical reaction of joy exploded within it. Photosynthesis began, the alchemy of turning light into life. The seedling unfurled. It stretched its spine, uncurling the leaves that had been folded in prayer deep underground. It looked around. The world was not dead. The world was bursting with color. The snow was gone, replaced by a carpet of green. It looked at itself. It was no longer a hard brown pebble. It was a living, breathing entity of green and gold. It was alive. As it grew taller in the coming weeks, eventually forming a bud, it looked down at the earth below. It looked at the spot where it had been buried. It realized the ultimate truth of its existence. The winter had not been the end. The winter was the bridge. The darkness was not an enemy. It was the teacher. The breaking was not a tragedy. It was an opening. The flower that eventually bloomed was far more beautiful, far more resilient, and far deeper rooted than the flower it had fallen from. It had survived the underworld. It carried the wisdom of the dark in its petals. It stood tall in the garden, swaying in the wind, not with fear, but with a dance. It knew that no matter what seasons came, no matter how cold the winter, it had the power to turn being buried into being planted. And to anyone watching, to anyone walking through their own winter, the flower stood as a silent testament. Do not be afraid of the dark. It is only the shadow of the hand that is reshaping you.